After informing Terra that she would be having her breakfast in the drawing room, Ludmilla walked down the main corridor to the entrance of the guest house. Judging by the appearance of the patio as she passed by the courtyard, the streets would still be damp and gloomy. She opened the front door and walked up to where the two Death Knights faced the street at the end of the lane by the letterbox. Looking at all the spikes on their armor, it seemed a hazard to even attempt passage between the pair of towering sentinels. Standing behind them on the path leading from the door, she cleared her throat just loudly enough to be heard, and the one to her left turned to look in her direction. It did not move like a human normally would, instead twisting its body around with the joints of its dark armor somehow allowing the uncomfortable-looking action. The web of red veins that ran over the black plates made its armor seem more like a carapace, pulsing with malignant energy. Its baleful crimson gaze turned down to meet her own, much the same way as the one in the streets did the previous evening. Maybe they just looked that way all the time. She shifted to face her undead footman. "Inform Lady Shalltear that I will be ready to meet with her in an hour," she said. "There will be a single maid from my household accompanying me." Without awaiting anything further, the Death Knight marched off. Its partner moved to occupy the position that had been left vacant, purposefully stepping over to the other side of the lane. It seemed that every one of them wielded their weapon on the right. The tower shield it held would have blocked its line of sight to the entrance it was guarding if it had stayed where it was. Not only were these undead frightening and powerful in appearance, they seemed to display a measure of competence as well. After looking into the letterbox and finding it empty, Ludmilla returned into the guest house, closing the door behind her. Breakfast had already been set in the drawing room. It seemed that Yuri Alpha had left the ornate dinner tray with its polished cover behind to be reused. She was greeted by fresh bacon and fluffy white bread with a dish of butter on the side. It was very different from the village stew she was used to. There was a distinct lack of greens, and everything else. She wondered if it had anything to do with the supply situation in the city, or if it was just what her maids considered a regular breakfast. Her father had always insisted they prepare the same stew that he had become accustomed to, going so far as to bring all the ingredients along on the trip, so she had never experienced the local breakfast before. After finishing her meal, Ludmilla decided that her father had the right idea. While the light breakfast had a refined feeling which was complemented by the tea served by Terra, it felt insufficient for the active lifestyle that she was used to. She suspected that she might end up having lunch early to make up for it. Terra spoke while coming forward to take the tray away. "If you have a moment to spare, my lady," she said, "the other two maids would like to make their introductions." "How are they?" Ludmilla asked. "I've heard they're still having difficulties adjusting to life here." Terra harumphed dismissively. "No more than Amelia and I," she said. "It's no excuse to hide under your covers until you start growing mold. They sure as hell started working once I threatened to make them stand outside with the guards." The older maid coughed, smoothing out her rough tone. "That is, they'll be useful to you in short order, my lady," she said mildly. "Ever since we've entered your service, things have started to become, well, more normal. You had the gist of it yesterday, I think. All it'll take is time. As more people resume their lives, the more others will be compelled to do so." Ludmilla wasn't sure if Terra meant the act that she had put on for them yesterday, their short discussion, or both. Even so, she took it as a sign that she was on the right track when it came to getting the people back on their feet. "Show them in, then," Ludmilla told her. "I'll be away for most of the day, so it's probably best to do this while we have the chance." She rose from the couch as Terra motioned for her fellow maids to enter. They were of an age and height with Amelia, perhaps slightly older. The two were remarkably similar to one another, both sported shoulder-length dark teal hair, with pale faces and paler expressions. Dull grey eyes peeked out from under their bangs at her, then shifted away when she looked at them directly. They seemed dangerously thin, even under their voluminous maid uniforms. "You're being rude to the Baroness, girls." They jumped at Terra's words, curtsying before Ludmilla. The older maid sighed. "Please forgive them for their behavior, Lady Zaradnik," she apologized. "These two are the Lynham sisters. The one on your left is Wiluvian. Liluvian is her younger sister." "We are at your service, Baroness Zaradnik," they greeted her in unison, albeit timidly. As they rose, Wiluvian gasped as Ludmilla reached out and cupped her cheek, tracing her fingers up her jawline before lifting her hair to reveal her ears. "Elves?" Ludmilla murmured absently. She had never seen them before, only recognizing their telltale features. Half-elves, my lady, Laluvian spoke as her older sister trembled under Ludmilla's touch. We're sorry, my lady. Why are you apologizing? Ludmilla frowned. I'm sorry, my lady. I'm sorry. Ludmilla withdrew her hand from the quivering Waluvian, casting a questioning look at Terra. Did something happen? Ludmilla asked. Terra sucked in her lips as she appeared to think on how to answer. There was clearly something going on with the two sisters, but it seemed she was a bit reluctant to share what she knew. I'm not sure if you'll want to hear this, my lady, the maid said. This whole build-up certainly seems to beg the question. There was a pause as Terra looked to the sisters, then back at her. Her mouth worked behind closed lips, as if she was still trying to work out what she would say. Speak, Ludmilla said sharply. She was growing impatient. Some time had passed and she expected someone to arrive to retrieve her at any point. They were in the service of Count Facet, Terra said. The two sought refuge within the city after the battle. That doesn't sound bad at all, Ludmilla said. Why would you deliberate so much over that? They weren't maids, my lady, Terra replied. They were his bed slaves. Slavery is illegal, Mrs. Roach. Ludmilla's voice was stern. Both in Riastais and the Sorceress Kingdom. Terra shrugged, as if Ludmilla's statement could simply roll off of her shoulders. I don't know much about laws, my lady, she said, but that's what they were. Count Facet was a powerful man in the duchy. As long as he was discreet, no one could gainsay him. Ludmilla narrowed her eyes at Terra's words. Her father had been wary of the man and shared his thoughts with his children, but she never imagined that the Count went so far as to flaunt the crown laws. Something did not seem right. She turned her attention back to the sisters. Are Mrs. Roach's words true? She asked. She speaks truly, my lady, Laluvian hesitantly answered for the both of them. How did you come to be where you are now? Our mother was a slave as well, Laluvian replied. We were born slaves. Ludmilla blinked several times at the reply, but it wasn't the answer she was seeking. She rephrased her question. What I meant was, what happened that led up to your seeking refuge here? The half-elf maid looked up fearfully at her, and Ludmilla saw herself reflected in Laluvian's eyes. She didn't think her face was that scary. Why were they so frightened? The Count, he sent us out to the military district to entertain his men a few days before the battle, Laluvian explained. We were still there when the survivors came rushing back to the city, fleeing for their lives. Seeing how much confusion and panic there was, we went and vanished into the city, planning to escape when we had the chance. Laluvian swallowed, staring at something in her memory. Except that chance never came. This city is now ruled by the undead and we thought there was no way for us to survive when we saw that there was no work to be had. We returned to the Count's manor here in the central district when we found out he had returned to the city, hoping he would take us in again, but he disappeared that very same day, and no one knows what happened to him. His household wouldn't let us in, either. Miss Alpha found us on the street near to the manor, and she offered us the chance to work as maids in the city. Though it was an act born of desperation, Ludmilla found it remarkable that they had made their way to the middle of the city when the regular citizens would not even leave their homes out of fear of all the undead stationed in the streets. With how frail and frightened they appeared to be before her, she would not have imagined that they could. Are we fired? Ludmilla looked back to the source of the voice. I'm sorry, my lady, Laluvian said quietly. Are we fired, my lady? Women such as us, we aren't qualified to serve as maids, are we? Ludmilla knew that they were correct. Women of their background would not be considered suitable as maids, even in the loose sense of the profession in the central district. While she did not expect any of the hired maids here could even measure up to true maids of noble households like Yuri Alpha, their disreputable history also disqualified them even as temporary hired help. If the role maid had not personally taken them in, they wouldn't have even warranted consideration for training. She glanced at Terra, who stood stone-faced to the side. There would be no feedback from that front. It was a conundrum where the Lynham sisters, unasked for circumstances, ran counter to their will to create a future free of that past. If Ludmilla was not in such a sensitive position, she would not have any issues with taking them with her to Warden's Vale to create new lives there. Such as it was, however, Having second-generation bed slaves in her employ was both inconceivable and improper. The scales of her judgment, unfortunately, leaned clearly to one side, against her personal feelings on the matter, and she sought some way to reach an agreeable outcome. She turned to examples, searching for some pretense from the past or present, and eventually thought of the previous evening in the cramped alleys of the city. Lady Shalltear had reached out to tend to the battered and sick harlot, in plain view of a throng of bystanders. It had sent a powerful message to the people, herself included. Even the city temples that she knew of might have shown open disdain for the woman, perhaps only tending to her out of sight in order to avoid unwelcome speculation. Yet our new liege had done so in complete disregard to her station as a direct vassal of the Sorcerer King and to her office as a high-ranking member of the clergy. She was in a position of incredible political power, but she cared nothing for appearances, only for the will of her sovereign. If her benefactor was willing to interact with a prostitute, then Ludmilla could not rightly turn down slaves trying to escape a similar fate. "I would like to speak with Urialpha about a few things," she said, "but no, I do not intend on immediately dismissing you. We should also have a priest examine the two of you to ensure you are healthy after your ordeals." Wiluvian turned her face up to look incredulously at the words. Liluvian brought her sister close as she turned tearful at Ludmilla's response. "Yes, my lady," they cried. "Thank you, my lady." The sisters kept bowing and thanking her. It was already feeling awkward after the first few seconds. Fortunately, the doorbell rang from the maid's office. Tara turned and headed out to answer, leaving Ludmilla with the two half-elven sisters who continued with their wholehearted show of gratitude. "What's the delay?" Lady Shalltear's voice sounded from the hall, and she entered the drawing room with a pair of her beautiful attendants at her heels. Ludmilla turned and stepped forward, presenting herself respectfully. "Good morning, Lady Shalltear," she said. "Thank you for personally coming to retrieve me." The maids, realizing that their mistress was addressing her own superior, immediately followed suit. Wiluvian and Liluvian had already been halfway to their knees thanking Ludmilla, and ended up with their faces to the rug. Lady Shalltear leaned to the side to look around Ludmilla at the maids prostrating on the floor. "Training your servants is all well and good," Lady Shalltear said lightly, "but didn't we have an appointment?" "That's not what I was doing actually, if you don't mind, my lady. Could you check the health of these maids?" Ludmilla asked. "They've been through a bit of a thing." She faltered at the end of her request, unable to provide an appropriate euphemism for their circumstances. "If that's all that's holding us up, I suppose." Lady Shalltear circled around to look down at the nearly prone maid sisters. "You may rise," she said. At her voice, the Lynam sisters' kneeling forms unfolded and they sat up. Looks of awe appeared on both of their faces as they laid eyes on her peerless beauty. Without Ludmilla's talent inadvertently tempering their reactions with her hidden appearance, she supposed this sort of enthralled state was to be expected. "Well, beyond being nervous and fatigued, she hasn't sustained any damage to her body," the cleric said absently as she shifted her gaze from Wiluvian to Liluvian. "This one is also uninjured, except you." Lady Shalltear turned back to Ludmilla. Even her monstrous appearance lurking under the enchanting visage seemed to portray a bit of disgust, somehow. "Where exactly have these girls been?" she asked. "They were sent to serve as company for one of the nobles' men in the military district," Ludmilla answered, "in the days leading up to the battle that took place at Katza Plains." "Were they intimate with anyone after that?" Lady Shalltear continued her queries. "The last thing we need is a city full of disease on top of everything else." Ludmilla looked to Wiluvian and Liluvian. They shook their heads vehemently and Liluvian spoke, flushed with embarrassment. "No, my ladies," she said, "after all that, we wanted to avoid it as much as possible, but, how did you know?" Lady Shalltear had not appeared to cast any spells, yet she was able to discern the state of their health at a glance. Now that Ludmilla thought about it, Bohadine and Sophia were able to keep the village's health in order as well, somehow. Growing up in a village with a priest was a bigger boon than she had realized. She supposed that in a city there would be many that did not benefit from the temples, especially if they lived a life in the shadows, or simply could not afford it. A settlement without a priest would need to rely on a local druid or an apothecary of some sort. Regardless, Lady Shalltear did not deign to answer, instead reaching out for the maid. "Remove disease." Just like the previous evening, Ludmilla saw the faint glow of magic pass over Leluvian. There, the cleric withdrew her hand. Now, shall we get to work? We have a big day ahead of us. Of course, my lady. Ludmilla lowered her head in gratitude. Thank you for your assistance. Lady Shalltear's attendants helped to carry out Ludmilla's small tower of books and folders, much to Amelia's visible relief, as they made their way out of the manor. The Death Knight that had been dispatched was back at its post and, between itself and its partner, had turned the exit of the manor lane into a spiky obstacle once again. Lady Shalltear led the procession, not caring to even slow as she approached the guards. The two sentinels parted and stood at attention as they passed through, heads held high behind their massive cower shields. Ludmilla felt a tug at the hem of her bolero. Amelia nervously clutched at her, crowding in closely as they crossed the threshold onto the road. The heavy, metallic tread of sabatons over the streets sounded from behind them as the two Death Knights fell into step behind them, and the group made their way briskly towards the offices near the front gate of the district. Several of the guest manors that they passed showed signs of activity within, their chimneys smoking as fires were maintained to keep their occupants warm on the cool spring morning. Though none had Death Knights stationed, none showed any of the usual chores being done by household staff outside. Ludmilla had to raise her voice slightly to be heard over the brisk wind that the clouds had followed. She hoped that it wouldn't be perceived as her shouting at her liege. Lady Shalltear, she asked, would it be possible to have several of the other nobles accompany us? That would be inadvisable, her liege returned. They don't have the same mental fortitude as you do. Well, you'll see what I mean shortly. Ludmilla turned her head to see if Amelia had anything to say, but it seemed she was too busy jealously looking over the other attendants. Their alabaster garments, seemingly designed for a much warmer climate, were composed of sheer, layered silks which were very flattering when it came to emphasizing their voluptuous appearance. They, on the other hand, seemed to pay no mind to the envious looks from the young maid, following after their mistress with silent steps. The civil offices of Rantel occupied the blocks just inside the southern gatehouse of the district. They were constructed along the main promenade leading up to the royal villa, framing the palatial structure with their dignified masonry, alongside rows of blossoming trees along the street. The trees themselves cared not for who occupied the city, flowering in a grand display of pastel petals. If the day had been a bit brighter, she might have reminisced over the day when she had first been brought to the capital and rode into the avenue from the gate, marveling at its vibrant splendor while sitting in her mother's lap. The first office on the opposite side of the road was their destination, one that served to receive petitions and reports from nobles and other functionaries. Stately stone steps, in front of a stretch of pavement allocated for carriages to drop their passengers off onto the sidewalk, led up to the main entrance to the three-story building. There were usually a pair of city militia stationed at the bottom of the stairs, but like the guest houses in the district, the Death Knights that she saw posted throughout the city were notably absent. As their group ascended the steps, the two that had escorted them to the office took up these positions at the bottom of the stairs. At her arm, she heard Amelia breathe a sigh of relief as they left the undead footman behind, stepping away to follow at a respectful distance. The large doors at the top of the stairs were framed with oak and set with large panels of crystal glass. The face of the building had been fashioned in a similar manner, with large windows to allow light into the interior as well as to provide a view of the street for those that awaited within. Lady Shalltear's attendants stepped forward to prop open the entrance, and the odors of parchment, ink and velica wafted over them as the doors swung open, revealing the darkened space within. There were no queues of petitioners, nor any individuals awaiting appointments seated in the private alcoves that lined the walls. Lines of velvet rope strung between the metal posts that guided queues hung forlornly in the middle of the chamber, and the sturdy carpets on the floors leading up to the reception remained pristine, unmarred and unsoiled with the marked lack of visitors. A broad counter of polished maple was divided into several sections, each normally having a government official awaiting to service the next client. Amelia had informed her that the Sorcerer's Kingdom had dealt with the absence of administrative staff in the city by using undead, and Ludmilla now confirmed this with her own eyes. At each of the 8 sections of the reception counter, an undead being awaited in still silence. Rather than the heavily armored Death Knights, they were more akin to the ones that she had encountered posted inside the guardhouses of the city, robed in black with yellowed strips of cloth, inscribed with some unknown language, hanging about their withered forms. As the door shut behind them, they all turned their heads towards the group, 16 crimson points of light glaring upon them in the baleful manner that Ludmilla had over the last day simply come to informally categorize in her mind as undead gaze. There was a heavy, thumping noise, accompanied by the flutter of papers and sound of falling books, the sound of her maid and the articles she was carrying hitting the carpet laid over the polished hardwood floor. Unlike the rest of the group, Amelia had slowed down after the doors had closed as her eyes adjusted to the dim interior. When the maid regained her vision, she had immediately fainted under the combined stares of the undead clerks. As Ludmilla turned to tend to her fallen attendant, Lady Shalltear's amused voice sounded from behind her. "Ah, that's it," she said lightly. "The last noble that attempted to enter ended up the exact same way." "A more concise warning might have been appreciated, my lady," Ludmilla said as she knelt down beside her servant, checking for injuries. Lady Shalltear sniffed dismissively. "Perhaps," she said. "Or perhaps I was seeing if your influence was strong enough to affect others to the point that this outcome wouldn't occur." Ludmilla carefully moved Amelia to a cushioned chair nearby and, after taking a moment to make sure the maid was all right, she turned back to speak to her liege. "My influence?" she asked. "What do you mean?" Lady Shalltear tilted her head curiously at her. "Your ability to influence those around you, of course," she said. "This is something that we've already observed a handful of nobles demonstrating in our time here so far. Whether they know that they're doing it, I cannot say. Countess Jesna appears particularly proficient out of the ones here, able to stir even other nobles to action. Emperor Jerkniv as well, if I recall correctly, was able to steal his escorts to a degree when he was granted an audience with His Majesty. Even walking out of your residence with that maid in tow is quite the achievement. All things considered, how many servants do you see running around in this district?" Ludmilla bit her lip as she thought it over, unconvinced. "I do not feel that I have done anything outstanding, my lady," she said. "People can be prompted to action by the actions and words of others from many backgrounds. It is not something reserved for nobles." "How curious." Lady Shalltear stepped forward, until there was barely a meter between them. She turned her gaze upward at Ludmilla, as if trying to peer at something within her. "My lady, what? You humans have adventurers, yes?" Lady Shalltear asked. "When you see a party of them, don't you look and think to yourself, this one's the fighter or this one's the wizard?" "Well, yes, but by the same token, your common folk have vocations of their own, merchants and cooks, blacksmiths and farmers. Do you not consider these vocations along similar lines? Can someone that has been a noble for all their lives pick up a hammer and declare that they're a blacksmith? Can a fighter one day decide that they want to be a wizard the next?" "Of course not, my lady," Ludmilla replied. "They would need to learn how, if they are even capable of doing so in the first place." "Then what is a noble?" Lady Shalltear asked her. "What sets them apart from other humans? What do they do that others do not seem to?" "We lead and administer, I suppose. We oversee our fiefs, upholding the oaths and obligations to our liege and to our vassals. The people look to us for direction and leadership, security and prosperity. It is our charge to realize this for our lands through the means available to us. Has it ever occurred to you that those of other vocations cannot do these things as effectively?" Lady Shalltear said, "unless it is also something that they also happen to do?" "Well, no," Ludmilla said. "I think anyone should be able to learn and perform the same administrative tasks that I am capable of, my lady." "So if you take someone under your wing and train them, what do they become?" Ludmilla looked around the reception hall, thinking on how to reply. "It depends," she said. "If it is to assist with my administrative tasks, perhaps a clerk or an accountant. If it is to help patrol the border or protect the domain, a fighter or a ranger. If we are grooming someone for the role of a village or town leader without granting them land, they would simply be a village chief of a small fee or a provost that oversees and organizes towns, cities and their surroundings." "And if you teach them everything you know, do they become a noble?" Lady Shalltear asked. "Perhaps, if they earn extraordinary acclaim," Ludmilla said. "Their liege will propose to have them married into their house, or grant them a title if the long-term services of their family are deemed valuable enough. However, nobles are usually born as nobles. Even those who are granted titles, like my great-grandfather, retain the skills of their previous vocations and have to learn the responsibilities and skills of the nobility after that. It is said that he did not take very well to them and he preferred to do what he was good at, delegating the majority of his civil duties to administrative assistants. Very good. Lady Shalltear seemed satisfied with her answers and stepped back a short distance. Ludmilla's eyes widened as a remarkable transformation occurred. In place of Lady Shalltear's black ball gown were glistening segments of crimson plate, armoring her from head to toe. A demi-lance appeared in her right hand, a weapon of peculiar design and construction that she had never seen before. Her shining silver hair trailed down from under her helmet between a pair of pure white wings. The equipment had the look of being suited for heavy cavalry, but for her short weapon and open-faced helm. Ludmilla's senses told her that this armor was not designed for mounted use, but for something that required even higher mobility and awareness. The sleek form of deadly beauty that Lady Shalltear presented caused any doubts that Ludmilla had concerning her principal role as a combatant to dissipate as if they had been a fanciful delusion. The voice that issued forth had a quality beyond the one that echoed off of the walls of the alley, and Ludmilla could only be still as Lady Shalltear spoke. "I am a vampire. I am a cleric. I am a knight and I am a Valkyrie. I guard the realm of the Sorcerer King against all that would defile it with their unwelcome presence. By his command, I will fight until all of his enemies lie slain or I fall carrying out his supreme will. There is no distance too far, no duty too great or small. I live and die for my master, and it is both my pride and my pleasure to serve." The words of her declaration resounded through the empty reception hall of the office. Lady Shalltear was not very tall, but at that very moment her presence dwarfed all in attendance. Her eyes shone with a clear conviction that would sweep away any challengers to her claim. Those eyes now turned to Ludmilla, holding her attention hostage. "All that I am capable of, all of my fighting prowess, the divine might I bring to bear, all of the awe and terror that I inspire, everything I love and desire, are because of who I am. I cannot be any less than this, and neither can you. So I will stop beating around the bush and ask, Ludmilla Zaradnik, who are you?" Arrested by Lady Shalltear's noble bearing, Ludmilla searched for an answer to her question. After what seemed like an eternity of silence, her liege closed her eyes and sighed. Ludmilla blinked, and just as suddenly found Lady Shalltear once again attired in her black ballroom gown. "Perhaps, like me," she said, "you grasp things better by experiencing them directly. Let's try this another way." Lady Shalltear looked past Ludmilla to the maid passed out on the chair near the window behind her. "Your servant," she said. "Tell her to wake up." Ludmilla looked askance at Lady Shalltear, then back to her maid when no explanation appeared to be forthcoming. She slowly walked over and knelt down beside Amelia. "Wake up, Lutzi," she said softly. The maid's shallow breathing continued uninterrupted, her eyelids remained still with no movement behind them. Ludmilla turned her head back to look at the group watching her. "You must do more than simply speak words," Lady Shalltear said. "Think on how you were able to encourage your maids to follow your lead." Ludmilla stood up, looking down at the young woman, thinking back on the previous evening when she had simply acted and the two maids cowering in her soul had eventually followed suit. Still a bit uncertain whether the feeling she had settled on was what Lady Shalltear was referring to, she tried again. "Wake up, Amelia." Though she had spoken just as softly as before, her words sliced through the air like an icy blade. More than simple words, it was akin to expression, carrying the tone of confidence, expectation and authority. Her will was carried into the air by her quiet words, heard clearly by all those around her. Amelia stirred, and her eyes fluttered open. She turned her head, still laying on the cushions, to face Ludmilla. "Lady Zaradnik, what?" The maid's eyes widened in terror as she looked around and found the undead waiting at the counter still staring in her direction. Her eyes rolled up into her head, and she fainted again. Ludmilla felt a twinge of guilt as Amelia collapsed back into her chair with a sigh. She looked to Lady Shalltear, who had stepped in beside her, arms crossed under her ample bosom. "Again," Lady Shalltear told her. Ludmilla licked her lips and cleared her throat. Stepping over to fully block her maid's line of sight to the counter, she leaned down and spoke again. "Wake up, Amelia." Once more, her words cut through the silence, and the maid responded. As she woke fearfully, Ludmilla cradled her maid's cheek with her left hand and tilted her face towards her, keeping Amelia's emerald eyes focused on hers. "Calm down, Amelia," Ludmilla said, "I'm with you. The undead here are not our enemies, You need not fear them so much. When her maid calmed down visibly, Ludmilla stepped back, helping her to her feet. She continued to hold her hand as she stood aside, facing the interior of the office with her. The maid's grip tightened as she wavered at the sight of the undead at the reception counter, but this time she did not faint. I see that you're a quick study. You should keep in mind what you've learned here. Lady Shalltear smiled slightly. You should also keep in mind that there are most likely more things that set you apart from the others. If I can piece this together with what little I know, I'm sure those around you have noted it as well. Not seeking to understand the extent of your own abilities is unforgivably foolish, and misplaced humility can bring as much harm as empty pride. Lady Shalltear turned, walking towards the front desk with her attendants following behind her. As Ludmilla fell in line to her side again, she asked a question. How did you know about this ability, my lady? Are you able to do this as well? There are some things that you may find similar, Lady Shalltear answered, but my abilities in that area are not precisely related to your own. I do, however, have several acquaintances that have powers much like yours. Thank you once again for your help, Ludmilla said. You can show your thanks by using your skills for the benefit of the Sorceress Kingdom, Lady Shalltear told her. You have your own work ahead of you, and I believe you'll be able to use these abilities to great effect in the future. They covered the space between the street windows and the front counter, and Lady Shalltear came to a stop. The undead clerks had not moved the entire time beyond observing their progress through the building. Reaching out to a board where a row of small wooden plaques hung on brass pegs, she took the closest, which had been engraved with the number 1. She held it out to Ludmilla. I believe your number is next, Baroness. Lady Shalltear's attendants piled the books and files that they had carried all the way from the guest house, as well as those they retrieved from the floor after Amelia had fainted, on the counter, quietly returning to their mistress' side without a word or even hint of complaint. The undead clerk they were placed in front of looked to the stack and back to them again, while the 7 others turned their heads to watch the proceedings. Even if they had been human officials, Ludmilla felt that all of this scrutiny would have felt fairly awkward. Standing aside while the attendants dropped off her things at the desk, Ludmilla asked a question. Lady Shalltear, what sort of undead are these? They're elder liches, Lady Shalltear answered. The same elder liches as the ones in the forms? If the forms say elder liches, then I suppose that would be the case. It occurred to Ludmilla that Lady Shalltear had not actually read all of the paperwork that she herself had spent hours poring through since the previous evening. Her liege did not miss the put-upon look that she gave her. We have plenty of them wandering about, Lady Shalltear told her as she gestured about loosely with her left hand, and they're smart enough for the Guardian Overseer to have a small army of them trained to be ready for administrative tasks soon. Unfortunately, they haven't had a chance to prove themselves, so they've understandably become quite restless. Just look at how eager these ones are. In front of them, the crimson points of light in the hollows of the elder leech's skull flared. It could have been angry, excited, happy or bored for all Ludmilla could tell. Amelia whimpered from behind, and Ludmilla turned to speak to her. Lutzi, she said in soothing tones, if you are still a bit uncomfortable around the undead, you may rest in the waiting area with Lady Shalltear's attendants while she and I attend to business. Lady Shalltear, face painted with the realization that her attempted deflection had failed, piped up in a surprised voice. Wait, why am I doing this as well? A lady of your station should have an understanding of the inner workings of the realm, should she not? Ludmilla asked. I told you, I'm really only good for fighting. Lady Shalltear looked down and brought the points of her fingers together. I do not believe that, Ludmilla said. I think you are an excellent mentor, my lady. You have already helped me far beyond my expectations, including with things I never would have conceived of before. You are a font of wisdom, and you possess charisma that any noble would envy. The Sorcerer King has other subordinates that are much smarter than me, you know? For some reason, Lady Shalltear seemed to not harbor much confidence in herself. Ludmilla could not understand how such an amazing woman could have such a self-deprecating disposition. Those with the gift of intellect surely play a crucial role in the workings of a realm, Ludmilla agreed, but it is wisdom that guides, and charisma that leads. When the people's hearts are troubled, when souls in turmoil seek stability, they turn not to the sages with their inventions and ideas, but to trusted elders and dependable priests. When faith is kindled and loyalty inspired, it is more often achieved by the words of a great orator than it is the result of some clever scheme. It may be as you say and you cannot match the intellect of some of your peers, but, personally, I think your other qualities more than make up for it. Both of Lady Shalltear's appearances held equally complicated expressions upon hearing Ludmilla's words. Whatever her inner conflict was, however, it ended abruptly when she brought her palms up to slap her cheeks loudly. Fine, I'll do it. Her expression looked like she was preparing to go to battle rather than submitting paperwork. I'll have you explain things to me if I have any questions about this. It would be an honor to serve, my lady. Ludmilla lowered her head. Lady Shalltear turned to her attendants and waved them away. They, together with Amelia, left to wait back near the front windows of the office. Ludmilla watched as they seated themselves together in a small circle of chairs, facing one another. I have been wondering for a while now, your attendants, are they your acolytes? Ludmilla asked, or perhaps is that how maids dress where you hail from? They're my vampire brides, Lady Shalltear answered. I have many of them under my authority, and they serve as my attendants in various ways. Ludmilla looked back towards the waiting area at Amelia, who seemed to be trying to strike up a conversation with the silent attendants without much success. They are silent most of the time, Ludmilla noted. Do they speak much on their own? Why, of course, Lady Shalltear said. They can be quite talkative. Out here, however, there's usually not much reason for them to say anything. I see. Amelia would be in for quite a shock if she inadvertently discovered that she was trying to chat with the very undead that she was deathly afraid of. Ludmilla hoped she would come back to a conscious servant when she finished with her work here. The clerk's withered face betrayed no sign of irritation or impatience at the continuous delays as the pair stepped up to the counter. Ludmilla instinctively tested the air at the sight of its desiccated flesh, but, rather than the stench of decaying corpses, there was a very faint trace of the cold, unsettling scent that was associated with the undead. With so many of them in the city, she was surprised that she had not really detected this before now. It must have been the enclosed space of the office that allowed the odor to collect and linger in the air. They seated themselves on the tall, cushioned stools that were lined up in front of the reception counter, and Ludmilla reached for the folder at the top of the pile laid upon it. Fishing out the application forms that were in various stages of completion, she skimmed through them one last time before pushing the first completed application forward over the counter. A shriveled hand reached out and held the form upright as the elder lich briefly scanned the piece of paper. It then wordlessly held up the form beside its head. From above, there was a leathery flutter as an imp swung down from its perch, swooping over their heads as it snatched the form and flew away deeper into the office. The hand lowered to rest on the counter once again, and the elder lich resumed staring at Ludmilla. That's it? She stared back blankly. I didn't understand any of that, Lady Shalltear said from beside her with a distraught look. I told you I was only good for fighting. Maybe I should quit while I have some dignity left. Ludmilla presented the next form. Only 2 had been completed, while the rest lacked various degrees of crucial information. The first was a request for agricultural labor for the old terraces where she planned to cultivate oats. This one was for harvesting timber. Again, the process repeated itself. Though the first imp had not returned yet, a second from the neighboring counter took the form away. The next form, for road construction, was nearly complete, but it required a director to oversee the labor. She laid the sheet on the counter between them. I would like to request a technical advisor for road construction, Ludmilla said. The elder lich lifted the sheet, scanning it in the same manner as the previous forms. This time, it set it back down on the counter before speaking in a deep voice that sounded like someone was rubbing 2 pieces of dry leather together. There are currently no technical advisors for this request available, it said. The current waiting time is undefined. Ludmilla blinked several times. She turned her head to look at Lady Shalltear, who seemed to be busy trying to read the upside-down form, then back at the clerk. Does that mean I have to find my own advisor? She asked. All requests must be fulfilled through the central administration, the elder lich replied. Technical advisors must be trained and licensed for operations by the Department of Transportation and Logistics. Oh, that's me, I think? Lady Shalltear spoke in what sounded like half a question beside Ludmilla. The Minister of Transportation isn't familiar with her department's own paperwork? Ludmilla asked. Ludmilla tried ignoring the fact that Lady Shalltear appeared to be surprised by her own realization that she was the Minister of Transportation. She wondered if the reason why the elder liches were all paying such close attention to them was that they thought they were being tested by a member of the king's cabinet. "There's so much of it, and it just came out at the beginning of the week," Lady Shalltear said in an attempted defense. "Besides, my vampire brides are capable of handling most of the paperwork." "Still, you are the department head, are you not, my lady?" Ludmilla said, "Making sure that everything runs smoothly and that appropriate policies are passed in the royal court is a duty appointed to you by His Majesty, is it not?" "Arg, I get it already. I'll take a look at all this at night while you're sleeping. Let's just get on with the rest of what you have here." "Do you know of a technical advisor for this form, my lady?" Ludmilla asked. "Isn't that part of what you're supposed to be helping us out with?" Lady Shalltear answered, "Just find some and bring them to me, I'll sign off on it." The elder lich said they have to be trained and licensed first. "It will be on-site training. We can use your request for it, then use the trained advisors to help recruit and train new advisors." Ludmilla supposed she would have to find someone familiar with planning and directing road construction, as she had no such expertise. She took back the form for road work and pulled out the next. "I have questions about this form." "The forms have been approved for official use by the Guardian Overseer," the elder lich interrupted her. "Compliance is mandatory." The tone of finality in the clerk's words gave Ludmilla pause. Recalling that these clerks were in reality powerful undead mages, she wondered if non-compliance resulted in a hapless petitioner being immolated in their seat. She resisted the urge to check the carpet for scorch marks as she rephrased her request. "I require clarification on some of the fields within this form," she said carefully. Reaching under the counter, the elder lich pulled out a tome that looked identical to those that she had been provided by Yuri Alpha. It rapidly flipped through the pages, mechanically coming to a stop at exactly the right section. Ludmilla leaned over to point out various parts of the page. "As you can see," she said, "there are no recommendations for this produce listed in the almanac. Many of the goods harvested in my fief grow in marshes and wetlands, and there are no similar references to use. For fields not specified by reference materials," the elder lich said, "collection of data is prescribed. State your request." "To begin with, I would like to know what these units of labor mean. What is a light unit?" "A light unit of labor is a single undead servitor, rated from level 1 to 20. Undead? Level? In hindsight, Ludmilla thought she shouldn't have been surprised at the first revelation, but was completely oblivious about the rest. "What is a level?" Her mouth worked slowly around the unfamiliar word. "A level is a measure of your proficiency in a class," Shalltear said from beside her. "I believe your adventurers use something similar, but less concrete and subject to the reporter when estimating the strength of individuals." "What is a class, my lady?" Ludmilla wasn't sure she understood. "Does it have something to do with one's vocation?" "Not quite," Lady Shalltear said. "A person may have classes outside of those related to their current vocation. Just think of it as getting better in what you're doing, and growing in physical ability. In the case of a combatant, it also means that they gain access to more powerful spells and attacks. The civilian classes here may also have something along those lines related to their own matters." Lady Shalltear's rough description made at least some sense to Ludmilla, but she had never heard of natural growth and learning phrased in those exact terms. Adventurers recognized their own along similar terms, and clear measures of power could be defined amongst practitioners of magic. "I see," she said. "Then what would an example of a light unit of labor be?" Lady Shalltear spun in her chair, facing the open chamber behind them, prompting Ludmilla to turn as well. A line of undead creatures materialized and rose before them. Ludmilla had skeletons or zombies in mind, but there were quite a variety that she had not thought of or seen before. "The skeleton warriors like the ones I summoned yesterday were level 16. There are different types as well, but I'm not sure exactly which kind you'd be getting for this sort of menial labor. Those humanoid zombies, well, it's probably a bad idea to use them. There are a few that I don't think you'll find much use out of, like the vampire bats and incorporeal undead." Shalltear made a waving motion, after which many of the undead presented disintegrated into the air. There were several remaining, mostly skeletons and a handful that had the appearance of animals. Undead beasts are zombie types, she continued, but exhibit some of the qualities of the animals that they emulate. The cute puppy there that looks like a black wolf is level 7 and may be used in much the same way as a hound. I'm unsure if those will be made available. The rest are anywhere between 1 to 20, like the ones provided by the administration. Is that one an undead beast, or a skeleton? Ludmilla pointed to one of the only undead summons remaining that looked like it could fly. That's a bone vulture, Lady Shalltear said. It's a skeleton type. The vampire brides that follow me around are in the low 20s. If you need one of them to help with something that requires intelligence, I can assign them to you directly. Having the various undead displayed before her like they were varieties of livestock felt a bit surreal. Ludmilla was long over feeling like a fish out of water, however. She turned back to the counter to look at her forms. Any combination of these undead is available for request? She asked the clerk. For industrial purposes, yes, the elder lich answered. Undead servitors that can spread disease, wither the living with negative energy, and those that have no suitable applications in industry are prohibited. Ludmilla ran some figures in her head based on the recommendations for the other goods she had submitted, filling out the remaining blank spaces on the forms. Lady Shalltear watched from beside her as she went from document to document. What about these heavy units of labor? Ludmilla asked. Death Knights are employed to operate larger pieces of equipment, the elder lich told her, as well as perform other types of heavy labor. Soul Eaters are used to transport goods. A vehicle is not included. Ludmilla continued marking out the forms. What about these special construction units? Golems for large-scale development projects, the clerk responded. The palisade constructed around Carney village is an example of their use. There were hundreds of villages in the duchy, and Ludmilla had never heard of this particular one before. Why a village would merit such fortifications, she had no idea. She continued working through the forms. Golems aren't undead, are they? Ludmilla asked. Golems are golems, the elder lich replied flatly. Constructs, Lady Shalltear offered helpfully. The horses used by Darkness were the only golems Ludmilla had ever seen, so she was curious what they looked like. She hardly thought it appropriate to request one for just that reason, however. She would have to wait until she had a need for them. Filling out the last of the industrial forms, she handed them in all at once. As the clerk went through her submissions, Ludmilla turned to speak to Lady Shalltear. These undead will fight if instructed to, my lady? She asked. Say, if the village is raided by demi-humans. Of course, Lady Shalltear answered. Their original purpose is to fight according to their summoner's will, after all. What level are Death Knights? They're level 35, oh, they're actually stronger than a regular Death Knight since they're enhanced by His Majesty's abilities. The numbers started to become ambiguous. Skeleton warriors like the ones summoned by Lady Shalltear would rarely appear on the barony's shores when the wilderness tribes had particularly large conflicts upriver, but a solid patrol could work together to destroy one safely. Does that mean they are twice as strong as skeleton warriors? She asked. Oh, no, Lady Shalltear replied. Double the level does not mean double the strength. Then what is a Death Knight capable of? Ludmilla said, in the past, some of the raids along the border have been very strong, especially if they involved some important rite for a prominent demi-human warrior, or a desperate attack in hard times to secure resources. Lady Shalltear tapped her lip with a finger as she mulled over the question. Well, you requested 5 Death Knights, she said at some length. That should have been enough to kill everyone in the city of Erantle, under Riestize's rule, within a day or two if there weren't many strong adventurer teams present to defend the walls. They'd be quite effective at cleaning out the city districts with their special ability. I suppose that should be good enough then. Perhaps, Lady Shalltear said non-committally. I've no idea how strong your demi-humans are, but if your people have successfully kept them at bay, then I'd say that you'd be correct. Ludmilla put away the military request forms. There shouldn't be a need for excessive force. If she requested too many, she might come under suspicion for belligerent intentions. And what of me, my lady? She finally asked. What level would you say I am? Lady Shalltear peered at her for a moment before answering. If Aura was here she might be able to give you a better estimate, but based on how tough you appear to be compared to various adventurers and city militia. Level 3? Ludmilla sighed. It seemed that every single member of her future workforce could soundly thrash her. She hoped that she would be able to manage them properly. The Noble Household, Part 2. Those women serving in domestic matters within a household, colloquially termed maids, cover a wide range of specialized roles with varying degrees of importance and authority. Housekeepers are managers over the majority of the women serving in these domestic tasks, reporting directly to the lady of the house. They are responsible for hiring, development and promotion of those working under them and the overall condition and appearance of the manor. It is a senior position in the household retinue, and a housekeeper is usually served by junior members of the staff. A lady's maid is a direct attendant of the lady of the house. They assist in managing their mistress' wardrobe and appearance, as well as see to their various personal needs. Like the housekeeper, it is a senior position in the household retinue and does not normally see to menial tasks that junior positions are responsible for. Though a lady's maid also reports directly to the lady of the house, the housekeeper holds authority over the rest of the female staff, and indirectly outranks her. A lady's maid is not to be confused with a lady-in-waiting, a companion of noble birth who serves in a similar capacity. Those most closely associated with the common perception of maids are the junior staff, each performing specific duties in their part of the manor. Maids who work upstairs attend to tasks in the private areas of the manor. Those who work downstairs tend to the common areas of the manor, usually on the main floor or storage areas. The grades delineating their positions in the household hierarchy is usually dependent on the nature of the work itself. Those assigned to the most menial tasks tend to be the least respected and subjected to the worst conditions. It should be noted that maids performing kitchen duties do not report to the housekeeper, but to the cook.